Welcome back to Cross Keys. My name's Steve. I'm the winemaker here at Cross Keys Vineyards, and we're excited to taste this week's flight of white wines. With the weather getting warmer, these are the wines that really fit the climate as much as they fit anything else. So we selected these based on kind of some interest on how we make the wine here, and really it exemplifies kind of the differentiation we have in varietals or types of wine. And then also with the hops, the last wine we're going to taste today, something more unique, something interesting, and I think kind of a cool project that we started here a few years ago. But I think you'll see a common vein here of what we look for in aromatics in a white wine. To get nerdy, when we talk about aromatics, the way a wine smells, the way you taste a wine is really retronasally, and that means that it's literally the flavor inside your mouth works its way up into your nose. So whenever you can taste a specific flavor, it's almost always your nose that is doing that work for you. So flavor, nose, flavor and aroma are very, very closely tied together in a wine. So what we look for in these wines, the Viognier, the Chardonnay, and the hops, are the actual texture on the palate, some of the acidity differences that we get. Those are things that we determine by the mouth, and then in the aroma and the flavor, those are things that are determined by the grape, and or also by a special addition that we make to the hops, which obviously is hops. So we're going to start with our 2018 Viognier. We've tasted the Reserve Viognier in the past, and the difference is that we use for our regular Viognier a combination of stainless steel and oak. And so we use about 20 to 25% new French oak on the Viognier, and that provides the flavor from the oak. When we say oak, typically that refers to new oak. That's what we're talking about. Because within about a year of use, sometimes up to 2 years, an oak barrel becomes neutral. And so it can be a great vessel to age wine in, a great vessel to impart some oxygen exchange through the wood. It still does a lot of good things for the wine, but the flavor of the oak itself is gone. So in this Viognier, this has 20% new oak, new French oak in it. And what we look for from that is those caramel, and especially in a white wine, sometimes I always find like a toasted marshmallow. And that's kind of the interest, that extra level of complexity that we get. And with the Viognier, we're finding with the aromatics, a lot of that same floral boxwood that we had in that Reserve Viognier, but then there's that extra level of caramel. And what makes Viognier unique from the other wines that we grow here is that it really presents floral and fruity aromatics and flavors, and then also tends to be a struggle with acidity. And when I say struggle, Viognier loves to get ripe, and as the grape ripens, the sugar will increase, and sugar, essentially you can think about it in a grape as potential alcohol. The amount of sugar in a grape has nothing to do with the sweetness of the wine itself. It's all about the potential alcohol. Now we can leave sweetness in it with residual sugar, but for all intents and purposes, ripeness, sugar increases, potential alcohol increases, and then acidity decreases. And so it's a challenge with Viognier to find that perfect point where the acidity has not gotten to the point where the wine tastes flat or watery, but at the same time it gets ripe enough and sweet enough, the grapes get sweet enough that you get those really intense aromatics and flavors. And I find when you drink the Viognier, I don't think anybody would ever consider this a flat wine. And when we say flat, that means lacks acidity. It has great acidity up front and in the mid palate. It's a very rich wine, but that is a conscious decision on our part on when to pick the grapes. If we let this sit out for an extra week, we would have lost so much acidity that the wine would almost become watery. So it's very important for us to focus on that acidity when dealing with Viognier. But at the same point, as we taste those grapes, we need to make sure that we're starting to get those flavors that are going to show up in the wine as well. So it's a balancing act of finding that perfect point when we can have flavor, aromatics, and still retain the acidity that we're looking for. And the other nice thing that oak does, because this Viognier has that 20% new oak, is it tends to harden the palate, focus the palate. That's what I like to call it. You don't really get a bitterness from this wine, but towards the finish of the wine, it really starts to kind of become more linear, and it's a harder sensation. It's almost like that hard water sensation, and that is that it helps complement the acidity. So if Viognier is lacking acidity, sometimes we'll use new oak to try to build up that sharpness of the wine just a little bit. They have a very similar effect on the palate. And so as we do that, the result is a wine that finishes quite cleanly, but still has very nice complex flavors. It doesn't leave your mouth too, cloyingly sweet, like you've just had some candy, or it's not so acidic that it makes you pucker. It's a really nice balance between that oak and acidity, and then obviously all those right flavors that we're looking for. Viognier has been, this is still in 2018 an experiment for us. That's why we made the Reserve Viognier and the regular Viognier, and we're trying to figure out exactly how we want to make it. So 2018 was kind of the first year that we had the full batch of Viognier, plenty of tons when we harvested it, to try it in different ways, and we're really finding that those aromatics that we get from the stainless portion of the Viognier really provide the backbone. But at the same time, what we've learned from the 2018 Viognier is that the oak is such a great complement, especially a delicate oak that doesn't taste too woody. It's really just more caramel, like I said, toasted marshmallow, and then really focuses that palate, and it really helps us with the acidity that can be an issue on Viognier. Next, we're going to have the 2018 Chardonnay. And Chardonnay traditionally is considered the winemaker's grape. So Chardonnay is, broadly speaking, there's no absolute truth in wine, but broadly speaking, Chardonnay is a relatively neutral grape. So it doesn't have that boxwood, floral, pineapple that you get out of Viognier. Typically, you would say white flower and green apple are kind of the classic Chardonnay flavors. And so with our Chardonnay, what we can express from it, the textures we get, the acidity we get, the flavors that we get are all dictated by the winemaker. We can ripen it to the point where you get a lot more of like a ripe apple, a little bit of some darker peachy flavors from it. You pick it really early, you get more herbaceousness and some that green apple. And so really it's kind of the winemaker's decision at any point. The grape doesn't tell us what to do, we can tell the grape what to do. And our focus for Chardonnay, once again, is acidity. Now Chardonnay holds acidity very, very well. We start the decisions on Chardonnay in the vineyard itself. So right now, this time of year, in the middle of June, we're starting to pull leaves off of the vine. So we pull the leaves around all of the clusters, and that lets sunlight penetrate the clusters, and that really helps start to develop the flavor that we get in the skins. Now, if we do that very, very aggressively and let a lot of sunlight into the Chardonnay, you'll get a much riper style, a lot fruitier flavors. But at the same time, you're going to start losing acidity as well. So with the Chardonnay, what we like to do is pull those leaves very early in the process and then let them regrow. So by the time we're in the true heat of summer, they have a little bit of shade and the grapes can retain their acidity. And then once the Chardonnay is inside the winery, our focus is to find a balance between that fruit and then also the secondary elements that the winemaker can impose on the wine. So that's oak, lees contact, or how much it's stirred with its yeast, and also just the general age of the wine. So we try to keep a nice and fresh wine, but at the same time we want complexity, We want to tone the acid until it's nice and balanced, and we want to build richness. And the way we accomplish that is through partial malolactic fermentation. One of the main acids in Chardonnay, or in any wine grape, is malic acid. And malic acid is a very sharp, acidic acid. It's very, very noticeable on the palate. It's the same kind of acidity you get from an apple. But what's interesting in wine is that we can use the bacteria to ferment malic acid into lactic acid, which is a much smoother, creamier, richer acid that can provide also complexity based on the aromas, because those bacteria will provide kind of some milkiness, cheesiness, some interest to the wine as well. So we don't want to go all the way through malolactic fermentation. We want to do just a little bit so we can get some of those more complex notes and tone the acidity till we get to the point where we find it in balance. Some of the barrels that we have of Chardonnay go through a little bit of malolactic, some of them go through all of malolactic, and some of them don't go through any malolactic fermentation. So it's really a balancing act on the grapes. Or, when we pick the grapes, we have some with lots of acidity. We'll go through a little bit of malolactic fermentation. Some of the later varieties, or some of the later grapes that have more of the fruit flavors, we make sure that we don't let any malolactic fermentation happen, and that'll maintain its acidity. So we're trying to find balance. And what we end up with is about, we get 15 to 18 barrels of Chardonnay that are all completely unique and different, and it allows us to build a blend off of that. So even though this is a varietal wine, it's Chardonnay, it's 100% Chardonnay, it's still a blended wine. Everything we do here is blended inside of the winery. So we'll pick a barrel that has really great fruit, maybe lacks a little bit of acidity, and we'll pair that with a wine that maybe doesn't have quite as much of that peach flavor we're looking for, but has tons of acidity, and we'll blend those together, and that's how we kind of build this Chardonnay. So on the nose, you still get plenty of green apple. A little bit of peach flower is what I would call it. You notice the acidity on the front of the palate and again on the mid palate. And this acidity lingers a little bit more than you find in that Viognier. And what that results is that nice juicy, mouth-watering sensation you get from drinking this wine. So this is a wine that's really good for cleansing the palate. It's a perfect food wine if something is a little creamy, fatty, so like a pasta dish, maybe some shrimp, something that's got some of those kind of richer notes to it. Chardonnay helps really cut through that and can complement it as well, because once again you have some of the dairy notes you get from malolactic fermentation, some of the fruit notes, floral notes that you get from the fruit itself, and then also the other thing that we really focus on with Chardonnay is lees stirring. Lees is just the yeast that's left over from fermentation. So the yeast is the fungus, the microorganism that ferments sugar into alcohol, and as it ferments the wine to dryness, there's no more food for them to eat, and the yeast will die and they fall to the bottom of the barrel. But there's still a lot of good flavor inside that yeast. At this point we call it lees once it's dead, and we actually go into those barrels, and every 2 weeks we stir up the yeast to try to get them to break down and release some of the more interesting flavor components. So the things that yeast will bring, lees will bring in this situation with Chardonnay is richness. You get polysaccharides and lipids coming from the cell walls that add a rich texture to the wine, and also you get some secondary aromatic notes like brioche, fresh baked bread, some of that yeastiness, and I think that's a nice complement to the overall fruit and floral that you get in Chardonnay. And then finally, we're going to have our hops. So hops, the idea of I get some skepticism for hops, because you think hops, you think beer, you think bitter, right? With hops, they actually have a very similar aromatic profile to what you'll find in wine, and they only are bitter if the hops are boiled. So obviously in wine, we never boil the wine, it never gets hot, so it's always cold. So essentially when we say hops, what we're talking about is a dry hopping. So all the aromatics you get out of like a beer IPA, all of the smell you get off the top of it comes from a dry hop. and that doesn't impart any of the bitterness. In a beer, the bitterness that comes from hops that have been boiled with the wort before fermentation. And so the idea was hops have, floral notes, fruity notes, grassy notes. That is completely standard in white wine. Those are things that we find in white wine all the time, and we thought it would be interesting to try to supplement the aromatics of a white wine, in this case mostly Vidal Blanc, with some of those hops and try to find kind of like the maximum aromatic white wine, and that's what we accomplished in hops. So this is fermented as a relatively neutral. Vidal Blanc doesn't have a lot of aromatics in general. Some pineapple, some interesting brown spice as it's fermented, but for the most part, it wouldn't be anywhere near as aromatic as like a Viognier. But what we do is after the wine's fermented, we make a blend to the sweetness and palate balance that we're looking for. I actually take whole cone hops, put them in, bags, submersion bags, and we'll put that inside the wine for up to 4 weeks. And at that point, the flavor of those hops is infused into the wine, and it provides, in this case, I get a lot of lime, lemon lime, some really interesting citrus notes there, and then a ton of orange as well, so lots of citrus. A background of some grassiness, which I think would be very reminiscent of something like a Sauvignon Blanc. Is very, very grassy wine, but we can accomplish those similar aromatics with the hop as well. And you find the same, for me, this is just really orange and lemon is what you get on the palate, and it's like a wonderful citrus balance to this wine. It's an overpoweringly aromatic white wine, and that's what hops can provide for us. So there's no worries that it's bitter. This is not an IPA. This is not a beer that makes you pucker. When we only dry hop it at very cool temperatures like we do with this wine, all you're getting is those aromatics and those flavors. And when we're trying to shift some of, if this wine was completely dry, had no residual sugar, I think it would taste very, very lemony and maybe really, really grassy. And the nice part is the residual sugar in this wine kind of shifts that over to a nice sweet herb, like almost minty, and then some orange. It's really, really powerful on the orange. And so that's why we have that residual sugar, is to try to move it to a sweeter fruit and sweeter floral aromatic. And hops is great at any temperature. I like it warm because you get a lot more expression out of those hops, but at the same time, there's so much in there, it's so powerful, that this is a wine that can be served ice cold, and it's still going to have just more flavor than you could ever fit into a white wine, because we've supplemented it with hops at that point. So it's a wonderful, ice cold, hot day wine. And I think with food, I think it would be very interesting. Traditionally, if you think like with beer, I always think sausages, onions, peppers, things like that. Kind of the traditional beer hall food, a pretzel, something with some salt, something with some fat. There's still enough acidity in this wine to cut through that, make it taste nice and clean. And then I think it really adds a deep complexity that it gets from those hops. So those are the wines that we had this week. I hope you guys enjoyed them. I think right now, I really, today we're finally having the first warm day. It's been raining for like 4 days straight. The Chardonnay for me is just absolutely lovely. I'm starting to already formulate dinner plans with some like grilled chicken and Chardonnay today. But I think the Viognier would provide some really interesting components, complement to a kind of a pasta dish. The other night I made a stew because it was so wet and cold, and I think Viognier would show up really well in that situation. Something that's strongly flavored, Viognier can really stand up to it. So I think these are great wines for this time of year, and I think they're very versatile and can kind of fit with any situation. Hopefully all of them you'll enjoy on their own, but I always say, it's easy to cheat with wine if you eat it with good food. So good food, good wine, it makes the food taste better, it makes the wine taste better. That's where it's kind of the goal. They've been together for a long time, and it's always good to have food with wine. The other things we've been working on here at the vineyard, the new project from Cross Keys is our canned wines. So this is Joy White, which is our most popular white wine, our Fiore, our Rosé, and then a very special wine, Blood Orange Cardamom. This is a Vidal Blanc based, slightly off dry white wine that has blood orange and cardamom flavors. It's infused with blood orange and cardamom. And I think this time of year especially, we throw these on ice, take them to the beach, and really enjoy them. Hopefully, we sell them as 187 mils, which is 1/4 of a bottle, so that you can buy them in a 4-pack or buy them individually. And I think they're a very versatile wine for this time of year, and definitely something that hopefully you put it in your cooler and you find it as a special treat at the bottom of the icebox. So hopefully you guys can enjoy those as well. I think this is warm weather season. We're excited to have some more options for you guys on these hot days. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Once again, check our website and our social media on Facebook. Follow Cross Keys. We are open. Take reservations. Please come out and enjoy us. We have plenty of space. Tons of social distancing here. You got plenty of room to spread out and enjoy some good wine. Every good day that we get for the next couple weeks, I think will be one to be cherished. So come enjoy it with some wine. Thank you.